Sarah is a GP trainee and Medact member. Delighted to welcome her here, and let's hear what you have to say.
Hi everyone, my name is Sarah Alhulail. I'm a junior doctor training to be a GP, and I'm also a Medact member and an ex-medicine member. So I've been tasked with giving the last talk, which is insanely intimidating, so I'll be looking at all other corners but your faces. So when Chris and Dave got in touch with me a couple of weeks ago to ask me if I could do this, I had two immediate reactions. Firstly, I wondered, and you probably are wondering, having read my forward CV in the booklet, whether their plan D had cancelled on them last minute. But then I thought, well, maybe it was actually a bit more deliberate for someone like me to be closing this conference. And by someone like me, I really mean someone like you. So all those relatively younger faces I see in the crowd, I suspect are made up of doctors, nurses, medical or global health students, health activists. Am I right, probably, in assuming that? So I suspect that, like me, you grew up at the turn of the century with that ridiculous idea that you can change the world, that you were going to cure HIV/AIDS, you were going to make poverty history, you were going to bring peace to the Middle East. I chose to pursue those dreams through the path of medicine. And I forgot to mention, I'm actually a Kuwaiti national. I'm also half Egyptian. I came to the UK 10 years ago to study and work in what I think is the fairest healthcare system in the world, hoping that one day I could bring that kind of justice through universal health coverage to Egypt and wherever in the developing world where it was needed. And again, like you, I've done the odd bits and pieces. I got involved with medicine a lot through university. I did a BSc in international health. I just finished a master's in global health. And I've also done my modest share of campaigning and activism, going from one cause to the other. Which brings me to my second reaction when I was asked to speak at this conference. In particular because Dave or Chris, I can't remember, said that they asked me because they wanted someone who was passionate and who could end on a positive rallying call to action. So, what Dave and Chris didn't know at the time, that when they asked me to do this, I was actually at the tail end of a period of almost complete hopelessness and shutdown when it came to the state of the world. It had started somewhere at the start of summer when I was in the middle of doing my dissertation for the Global Health Masters, which I think some of you are doing that this year. We were barely waking up from that Tory win. And then at the end of that June, within 1 week, both my countries, Kuwait and Egypt, experienced random bombings. One of them actually occurred near a family member. And of course, at the same time, in the background, it's not even in the background, it's at the forefront, were the atrocities of far greater magnitude in our region, from Syria to Yemen. To top that off, with the freedom of expression regressing greatly in the Middle East these years, I started to feel pressure from my family members not to have or voice certain opinions, even on social media, against the current Egyptian regime, against the crimes of Saudi Arabia and Yemen. So I found myself by the end of summer in the middle of a bit of an existential crisis. What was the point of anything I'd ever done or hoped to do when we seemed to exist in such chaos? So I lost myself in that panic of feeling utterly useless in the face of all the suffering and the random violence that I had no control over. And feeling useless, of course, leads to hopelessness. And so I stopped reading the news, I stopped talking to my friends, some of which are here, about current events or politics. I shut off my social media, and I started to retreat from campaigning, and I apologize to those who I've campaigned with, who I stopped answering their emails. So I retreated back into the walls of clinical medicine, where the world actually made a bit more sense and I could convince myself that I had some control as an individual, that I was not completely useless, that I could directly alleviate suffering, even if it was one person. So why am I telling you all this depressing stuff? I know you asked me to be positive. It's because I think before we move on from this conference, we need to pause and acknowledge that this is a very difficult and complex time for anyone hoping for a fairer, better world. It is heartbreaking and confusing. It's enraging and frustrating. We are a generation of young doctors and health professionals and health activists, and we are at risk of disillusion, hopelessness, and fatigue, and we've barely even started. And I am saying this out loud for my own sake as much as I am saying it for you. As you heard yesterday and this morning, this generation's action or inaction will determine what comes next. And complexity and difficulty are not valid excuses for inaction. We ignored Syria long enough to know that. We carry the burden or the opportunity of acting fast. And as health professionals and activists in particular, we are the natural advocates for all humanity. We have the ethical mandate and the legitimacy to receive those burdens and lead the fight, as Dr. McCoy has said this morning. So I don't want you to feel alone and panicked in receiving this burden. I don't want to feel alone and panicked in receiving this burden. I really think we need to find hope and solidarity in each other. And I have to say the last 2 days have been like a rebirth. And it's been an inspiration just being around everyone here. And just hearing all the discussion and the workshops and your questions, you clearly are educated. You are definitely an agitated bunch. But I think it's time for us to organize. So I am inviting all of you, whether you're doctors, nurses, soon to be graduating medical students or global health students or health activists, to please join Medact. Join us and let us build and grow this movement. A movement that is not reactionary, a movement that doesn't wait for the next awful viral picture or the next preventable tragedy or the mood of our politicians to change before it calls for action. A movement that's bold and positively radical in its demands for a fairer, safer, and better world. So in terms of next steps, please look out for that letter that Dr. McCoy spoke about this morning. Let's meet in a month's time. Let's not meet in 12 months, let's meet in a month's time. I'm pretty sure we can get a core group of Medact members to meet in a month's time and decide what we are going to do next. Check out the Medact website because we will put a date then for when to meet. And bring your passion and your bold ideas, because I've heard many of them in those workshops. I know they are there. And to end on a bit of a more hopeful note, and from someone who's much wiser than I am, I had another moment on Thursday night where I received one more bad news from Egypt, and I was feeling hopeless again. And I thought I'd try out this thing that I read about a few months ago. So I emailed Noam Chomsky because I'd read somewhere that he responds to his emails. And I thought, I think I am at my darkest hour, I will do this. So I Googled his email and I emailed him. And I asked him two very small questions. Are you hopeful? And if so, how could you be knowing all you know? And you know Noam Chomsky knows everything. So he responded within 3 hours. So I'll read you what he said and I will end on that. He said, I'm very glad to learn about what you are doing. Your letter immediately brought to mind a panel last Sunday where I was one of the speakers, joined by the remarkable and heroic trauma surgeon Mads Gilbert, who discussed his work in Gaza for many years during the murderous Israeli assaults. The horrors he has seen are indescribable, but he retains his enthusiasm, his optimism, and his optimism that despite living in the circumstances that compete with the worst in the world, the courageous people of Gaza will struggle and win against terrible odds. And in brackets, he said, including now the LCC dictatorship. And I hope I don't get in trouble. And then he ended with, on optimism, we have two choices. We can give up hope and help ensure that the worst will happen, or we can grasp what rays of hope there are, and they are not lacking, and work to try to make the world a better place. It's not a difficult choice. Thank you.